We've got a bit of to and fro, I suppose, the gamesmanship of establishing the nature of this new relationship under the Biden administration. How do you view this relationship going forward, and what are your expectations from this set of meetings, given that it could lead to potentially that high-level presidential meeting as early as next month?
Yeah, I think from this meeting, we're not going to get any big breakthroughs, and I don't think that will be the purpose for having the meeting, but rather to have both sides reiterate their points of view. I think what we may get from this meeting is some idea of the tone of the Biden administration, because, of course, this is 6-7 weeks that the Biden administration has been in power, and it really hasn't determined its policies and its strategy in terms of China. So I think this meeting may be helpful to see the tone. And frankly, I think the tone will be that the U.S. is going to continue to hold China responsible for things that it has done, which are not in line with international order and are not in line with doing business fairly. And I think that the Biden administration will also make it very obvious that it is taking a bilateral or a multilateral, approach to the China relationship. And so I think this is going to be the main message coming from the U.S. From China, I think we've just heard some of the issues that China is interested in, whether it's relaxing the tariffs, relaxing the sanctions on some of its individuals for what's going on in Hong Kong, relaxing export controls against semiconductor manufacturers and Huawei. And as you mentioned, that possible summit between Xi Jinping and Biden, which I hear the Chinese are now saying they're not going to propose it. But what I'm hoping is that what we get from this meeting is at least communication, which has been lacking for the last 4 years during the Trump administration, and start getting a more regular relationship going.
Bill, you take a look at the landscape of some of the harder issues, particularly pertaining to human rights and sovereignty, the South China Sea, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan. These that we know are not issues that Beijing is going to budge on. To what extent is it useful for, the grievances to be aired, if you will, and can they then, after that's done, move on to some of the actual constructive issues where they can find compromise?
I think it's very important to air the grievances on both sides. We used to say, well, they know what our talking points are and we know what their talking points are, so why do we go through this practice? Well, if there's a talking point that is dropped, all of a sudden the opposition thinks, oh, they don't care about this anymore. So I think it's important to be able to air these grievances. And one thing that I think stands out, and our Chinese friends talk about the two sides should respect and treat each other as equals. And I think that this is something that we should do. However, all throughout the Trump administration talks on economic issues and talks on other issues from that administration and now the Biden administration, the Chinese have never acknowledged that they have done anything that abrogates international rules of order, or that goes against WTO rules, or anything that is against free market practices. So I think a real good beginning would be for China to acknowledge, yes, both sides have grievances, and yes, perhaps both sides may have done things that need to be remedied or mediated. I think this would be a very good starting point.
Bill, just this past week, we've seen more sanctions against Chinese officials, banning of wireless carriers from China, subpoenas for Chinese communications providers. What's the first couple of months of the Biden administration been like for American businesses?
Well, we have to remember that domestic politics here in the U.S. has a huge influence on what is being done now in putting together a China policy. The Biden administration has to look strong. And so, frankly, whether it's the FCC's activity or the Department of Commerce's activity or State Department acting on an executive order, these appear that they are being tough on China. And this is what the Biden administration wants to show the Hill, it wants to show Americans. And perhaps it will give the Biden administration a little bit of leeway to start actually talking about issues, to start trying to come to some common understanding with the Chinese. So many of these things. And of course, then there's the idea of negotiating, building up your leverage before you start the negotiation. But I think most of these things are really to show strength in domestic politics here in the U.S.
We've heard from sources that perhaps we could see China asking the United States for a summit coming around Earth Day. Which areas of cooperation are there that could be some of the lowest hanging fruits?
Yeah, well, the pandemic might be a nice place to start, since we really still don't agree on how it started. We do agree, however, that the Chinese have managed it much better than the Americans have, and that's for sure. But some cooperation on the pandemic, some cooperation on future healthcare issues, cooperation on new energy, cooperation on climate change. These are areas that we certainly could work together to come up with a better result for ourselves and for the rest of the world. I'm hoping that we'll be able to cut through some of the divisiveness and start to find common ground.
You mentioned as a point of significance the fortification of U.S. allegiances and alliances in the region. Mm-hmm. We saw that with the prioritization, obviously, of the meetings with Seoul and Tokyo before this meeting with Beijing. What are the implications when it comes to regional businesses and investment if there is more of a cohesive, alliance being presented by the U.S. and its allies in dealing with China?
To the extent that we can have a balance in the region, so that there won't be one country or one party that is overwhelming another party or the smaller countries in the region. So long as we have a balance, it will be good for U.S. business. And of course, we haven't seen U.S. business leaving China during this entire trade war that the Trump administration and China carried out, or now when the Biden administration has come in. So far, businesses are staying to a great extent in China, yes, diversifying supply chains, but certainly remaining in China. That market, what is it, 400 million middle class, in 10 years, 800 million, something like that. It's just too much to ignore or to leave. So I think balance in the region will be very good for business.